Today, we will delve into the life of Yves Trudeau, a name that many may not be familiar with, but whose actions have left deep scars on society. Our aim here is not to glorify or romanticize, but rather to educate and reflect on the social, political, and human consequences of his actions. This video seeks to shed light on the historical facts and the lessons we can learn from them. In the historical context of Quebec during the 1960s and 1970s, often referred to as the Quiet Revolution, the province underwent profound social, political, and cultural changes. This era was characterized by a fervent desire for modernization and secularization after decades of clerical dominance and conservatism. Quebec sought to assert itself as a distinct society within Canada, a movement accompanied by the rise of Quebec nationalism. The aspirations of the populace were high. There was a strong desire not only to improve economic conditions, but also to affirm a unique cultural and linguistic identity. It was in this climate of change that the sovereigntist movement began to gain momentum. Political figures like René Lévesque and organizations such as the Parti Québécois emerged, channeling the nationalist aspirations of a significant portion of the population. The debate over Quebec's sovereignty became a central issue in provincial politics, causing tensions between supporters of independence and those wishing to remain within the Canadian Federation. This political polarization created an atmosphere of division and intense debate, but also of hope and renewal. However, this period of transformation was not without its social and economic tensions. Unemployment and economic disparities persisted, and many young people in particular felt excluded from the promised progress. It was in this context that organised crime found fertile ground to take root and flourish. Corruption, already present in some sectors of society, began to infiltrate political and police institutions, creating an environment where illegal activities could thrive. Yves Trudeau, born in 1946, grew up in this climate of change and turbulence. Traditional values were being questioned, and new, sometimes radical, ideologies were emerging. For some young people, like Trudeau, organised crime represented a path to wealth and power, an attractive alternative to a system that seemed to offer no prospects for the future. Criminal gangs, often linked to international networks, began to play an increasingly important role in Quebec society, capitalising on the growing demand for illicit substances and the lack of strict laws to prevent them. The presence of organised crime had profound repercussions on Quebec society. Gang-related violence, retaliations, and drug trafficking began to affect the daily lives of citizens. Communities, particularly those in disadvantaged neighbourhoods, were the most affected, seeing their streets transformed into battlegrounds. Police and political corruption allowed figures like Trudeau to continue their illegal activities with impunity, reinforcing the sense of helplessness and frustration among the population. It is in this complex and often contradictory context that the figure of Yves Trudeau emerged. His rise in the world of organised crime was not solely the result of his personal actions, but also a reflection of the failures and tensions of a society in flux. Understanding this historical context is crucial to grasp why individuals like Trudeau could exert such influence and to reflect on the lessons we can learn for the future. The fight against organised crime and corruption remains a constant challenge, requiring continuous vigilance and mobilisation from civil society and public institutions. The rise of Yves Trudeau in the world of organised crime is a story that highlights both the complexity of criminal dynamics and the failures of the social and legal structures of the time. Born in 1946, Trudeau grew up in a Quebec that was undergoing significant transformation, where old social structures were giving way to new economic and cultural realities. In this rapidly changing environment, many young people, searching for direction and opportunities, were drawn to the promises of wealth and power offered by organised crime. Trudeau began his criminal career in the 1960s, a time when Quebec was in the throes of social and political upheaval. The rise of Quebec nationalism and tensions between different cultural and linguistic groups created an atmosphere of division and uncertainty. In this context, criminal organisations thrived, taking advantage of corruption and instability to expand their influence. Trudeau, with his charisma and tactical intelligence, quickly climbed the ranks, becoming an influential member of the Montreal Mafia. His ascent was marked by a series of bold criminal acts ranging from drug trafficking to extortion, money laundering, and contract killings. Trudeau skillfully exploited the weaknesses of the judicial and police systems, which were often corrupt and inefficient, to carry out his operations with impunity. His ability to navigate the underworld of crime while establishing connections with political figures and businessmen was a key factor in his success. The hierarchical structure and strict discipline of criminal organisations provided Trudeau with a framework within which he could exercise his authority and brutality. Gangs, often composed of young men from disadvantaged backgrounds, offered an alternative to social and economic marginalisation. For Trudeau, organised crime represented not only a source of income but also a means of asserting himself and making a name for himself in a world where violence and fear were tools of power. However, his rise was not solely the result of his personal actions. It also reflected the broader failures of Quebec society at the time. Endemic corruption, economic inequality, and the lack of opportunities for young people created an environment conducive to the growth of organised crime. Authorities, often indifferent or complicit, allowed figures like Trudeau to flourish, while vulnerable communities were left at the mercy of the gangs. The rise of Trudeau in organised crime had devastating consequences for Quebec society. Violence and fear spread through neighbourhoods, while drug trafficking and corruption undermined the very foundations of justice and public order. Citizens, caught between the violence of the gangs and the ineffectiveness of the authorities, were forced to live in a climate of constant insecurity. Ultimately, the rise of Yves Trudeau in organised crime is a stark example of the challenges a society can face when public institutions and social structures fail to protect their citizens. His story underscores the importance of combating corruption, strengthening the rule of law, and creating opportunities for all, in order to prevent the spread of crime and build a more just and secure society. The impact of Yves Trudeau's criminal activities on Quebec communities is a dark and painful chapter in the province's history. During the years he was active in organised crime, neighbourhoods in Montreal and other regions witnessed an escalation of violence, fear, and desolation. The consequences of his actions were profound and enduring, affecting not only those directly involved in crime, but also entire families, children, and the elderly who saw their daily lives upended by insecurity and despair. The communities most affected were often those already vulnerable, living in conditions of poverty and marginalisation. In these neighbourhoods, Trudeau's organised crime and his associates found fertile ground to establish themselves. Gangs use violence and intimidation to control drug trafficking, extortion, and other illegal activities. Residents, often caught between the threats of criminals and the indifference or corruption of authorities, found themselves powerless against this wave of crime. Violence became an integral part of everyday life. Gang-related retaliations, shootings, and murders spread terror through the streets. Schools, parks, and even homes were no longer safe havens. Children grew up in an environment where violence was pervasive, and where the prospects for the future seemed bleak and uncertain. Parents, worried about their children's safety, often had to limit their outdoor activities, which impacted social cohesion and collective well-being. Drug trafficking, in particular, had devastating effects on communities. Drug addiction increased, destroying lives and families. Young people, in particular, were vulnerable to the allure of illicit substances, seeing drugs as an escape from the harsh reality of their daily lives. The consequences of addiction were manifold: health problems, dropping out of school, delinquency, and in some cases premature death. The corruption and inefficiency of authorities exacerbated the situation. In some cases, the police and political leaders were complicit in criminal activities, either through corruption or due to a lack of resources and willingness to combat organised crime. This impunity reinforced the sense of helplessness among citizens who felt abandoned by the institutions meant to protect them. Women, often on the front lines facing violence and insecurity, were particularly affected. They had to cope with constant threats, both to their own safety and that of their children. In some cases, they were forced to leave their homes to escape gang violence. Women also played a crucial role in resistance and rebuilding efforts, organising support groups and community initiatives to try to restore a semblance of normality. Ultimately, the impact of Yves Trudeau's actions on communities was profound and multifaceted. The scars left by violence, fear, and desolation took years to heal, and some wounds are still present today. His story serves as a reminder of the importance of protecting vulnerable communities, strengthening public institutions, and promoting social justice to build a safer and more equitable future for all. The downfall of Yves Trudeau marks a pivotal turning point in the history of organised crime in Quebec, illustrating both the fragility of criminal empires and the critical role of law enforcement and justice in combating crime. After years of ruling from the shadows, where he evaded justice through a combination of violence, corruption, and manipulation. Trudeau's empire eventually crumbled under the weight of his own actions and the increasing pressure from civil society and authorities. Over the years, Trudeau had managed to maintain his grip on the criminal world through a strategy of terror and intimidation. His criminal operations, which included drug trafficking, extortion, and contract killings, had made him one of the most feared criminals in Montreal. However, his rapid rise also attracted the attention of law enforcement and the media, who began to exert growing pressure to put an end to his illegal activities. The first crack in Trudeau's armour appeared when members of his own network began to turn against him. Internal rivalries, power struggles, and widespread distrust weakened the cohesion of his organisation. Several of his associates, fearing for their own safety or seeking advantages by cooperating with authorities, provided crucial information that allowed investigators to better understand the extent of his criminal activities. In 1985, after a meticulous investigation and a complex infiltration operation, law enforcement finally arrested Trudeau. The evidence amassed against him was overwhelming, including testimonies from key witnesses, incriminating documents, and physical evidence that directly linked Trudeau to a series of violent crimes. His arrest was a significant blow to organised crime in Montreal, sending a clear message that even the most powerful criminals were not immune to justice. Trudeau's trial was a major media event, drawing public and media attention to the devastation caused by organised crime. The testimonies of victims and witnesses shed light on the extent of the violence and corruption that had marked his reign. In the end, Trudeau was convicted on multiple charges, including multiple murders, and was sentenced to life in prison. The fall of Trudeau had profound repercussions on the criminal landscape of Quebec. His arrest and conviction marked the beginning of a decline for organised crime in the province, as law enforcement intensified their efforts to dismantle criminal networks. The communities that had suffered under his tyranny began to see a glimmer of hope as fear and violence slowly receded. However, Trudeau's downfall did not mark the end of the challenges posed by organised crime. Criminal networks continued to adapt and evolve, finding new ways to conduct their illegal activities. The fight against organised crime remains a constant challenge, requiring international cooperation, adequate resources, and unwavering political will. Ultimately, the story of Yves Trudeau's fall reminds us of the importance of vigilance, cooperation, and determination in the fight against crime. It also underscores the crucial role of justice and the rule of law in protecting communities and preserving social peace. His legacy is a poignant reminder that even in the darkest times, justice can prevail and society has the power to rebuild and reinvent itself. The saga of Yves Trudeau, though marked by violence and criminality, offers valuable lessons on the dynamics of organised crime and how to combat it effectively. Trudeau's rise and fall illustrate the intricate interplay of social, economic, and political factors that can foster the emergence of powerful criminal figures. By carefully examining his journey, we can glean crucial insights that can guide future efforts to prevent crime and enhance community safety. Firstly, Trudeau's story underscores the critical importance of addressing the root causes of organised crime. Difficult economic conditions, lack of job opportunities for young people, and social marginalisation create fertile ground for recruitment by criminal gangs. To prevent the emergence of new criminal leaders, it is essential to implement social and economic programs that offer viable alternatives to illegal activities. Education, vocational training, and support for disadvantaged communities are powerful tools for breaking the cycle of crime. Secondly, the inefficiency and corruption within public institutions, particularly law enforcement and the judicial system, allowed Trudeau to thrive for many years. Corruption undermines public trust in the institutions meant to protect them and creates an environment where criminals can act with impunity. To effectively combat organised crime, it is imperative to strengthen the integrity and effectiveness of public institutions. This includes establishing rigorous oversight mechanisms, promoting transparency, and ensuring that corrupt officials are held accountable. Another key lesson is the importance of international cooperation. Organised crime is often transnational, with networks that extend beyond national borders. Trudeau himself was involved in criminal activities that surpassed the boundaries of Quebec, highlighting the need for international collaboration to dismantle these networks. Governments, law enforcement agencies, and international organisations must work together, sharing information and resources to combat organised crime on a global scale. Furthermore, Trudeau's story reminds us of the importance of community resilience. Faced with violence and fear, affected communities have often shown a remarkable capacity to mobilise and support one another. Community initiatives such as violence prevention programs, support groups for victims, and social reconstruction efforts play a crucial role in the fight against organised crime. Strengthening community resilience requires long-term commitment and ongoing support from governments and non-governmental organisations. Lastly, Trudeau's story teaches us that combating organised crime is a complex and long-term process. There is no magic solution or one-size-fits-all strategy that can eliminate organised crime overnight. Instead, it is a continuous effort that requires a multidimensional approach, combining repressive measures, prevention initiatives, and social reconstruction efforts. Vigilance, perseverance, and cooperation are essential to building a safer and more just future. In conclusion, while the rise and fall of Yves Trudeau are dark episodes in Quebec's history, they offer invaluable lessons for the future. By understanding the factors that contributed to his criminal success and learning from his mistakes, we can better prepare to face the challenges of organised crime and build safer and more equitable societies.